Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 102nd annual meeting of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society. My name is Ann Mason, and I am the Executive Director of the Antiquarian Society. We do now have a quorum of 35 members who are present. We actually have over 100 people who are attending the meeting. So I'm delighted that so many of you have joined us who are not members of the Antiquarian Society, and I hope this meeting will encourage you to become members. But we know many of you are joining us from across the country, so it's wonderful to have you here today. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to our president, Virginia Davis, and it is about 1:11 p.m. right now as we begin our meeting.
Begin. Welcome to the 102nd annual meeting of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society. I'm Virginia Davis, and it is my privilege to serve as the Society's president. Thank you for joining us this afternoon from your homes in Plymouth and beyond. Since we have confirmed there is a quorum, I will now call the meeting to order. And Ann already said the time. One of the purposes of the annual meeting is to elect officers and trustees for the Society. I invite Susan Fessenden, Chair of the Nominating Committee, to present this year's nominees.
Thank you, Ginny. Hello, everyone. The following nominees have been presented to the membership in writing for election to the Board of Trustees of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society. For the office of President, term 2023, Andrea Daly. For the office of First Vice President, term 2023, Kimberly Tracy. For the office of Second Vice President, term 2023, Belinda Brewster. For the office of Recording Secretary, term 2023, Catherine Angley. For trustee, term 2022, Eileen Gallerani and David Calori. For trustee, term 2024, John Hammond, Janice King, and Jacqueline Smith. These terms will begin at the close of this annual meeting.
Thank you, Susan. As a reminder, members of the Society should use the chat feature to make a motion and to second a motion or participate in discussion. Are there any nominations from the floor?
And we do not have any nominations, Ginny.
May I have a motion to accept the slate of nominees as presented?
And we have a motion from Elizabeth Riley.
May I have a second?
And we have that seconded by Leslie Pitts.
We will now start the poll so that members of the Antiquarian Society can vote in response to the motion to accept the slate of nominees to the Board of Trustees. You should see the poll on your screen, and you can select yes, no, or abstain. If there are two PAS members using the same device, the second member should vote yes, no, or abstain on question 2. If you are the only member using your device, you must select NA on question 2 before you submit your response. We will verify the results of the election when the poll is completed, and only members of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society can vote. Thank you.
And we're just going to, again, wait for a few moments while everyone has a chance to vote. So I'll be able to see how many people have submitted a vote. And then as soon as we feel that enough time has passed, we will close the poll and share the results.
course, my neighbor is cutting trees down right now.
I know
hope
that's one of
everyone
the
can hear.
challenges of doing a virtual meeting on a beautiful day. It's a beautiful afternoon here in Plymouth, and so I'm sure there's a lot of outdoor activities. But
Right.
Ginny, if it makes you feel any better, I can't actually hear the
Good.
chainsaw
That's
going,
good.
so you're still okay. And I'm going to end the poll now. We have it looks like 44 members have responded.
All right.
And on your screen, you should see the results, but we do have, again, we'll tabulate all of these once we are able to finish the meeting and see the full report so that we can confirm that everyone who voted was a member in good standing. But as of right now, we do have 44 members who responded to the first question saying yes to approve the slate of nominees, and then for the second question, we had more who responded if there was a second person on their device. So as of right now, it would stand that our slate of nominees for the Board of Trustees has passed.
Thank you. The nominating committee is responsible for researching potential new trustees and recommending individuals for election. Thank you to Chair Susan Fessenden and the other members of the 2021 committee for their work this year. The following nominees have been presented to the membership in writing for election to the nominating committee for 2022. Susan Fessenden, Chair, Catherine Angley, Michelle Badger, Cynthia Fisher, and Christine Sampson. Are there any nominations from the floor?
And I do not see any nominations from the floor, Ginny.
May I have a motion to accept the slate of nominees as presented?
Oh, we have a motion from Elizabeth Riley,
May I have a second?
and we have a second from Belinda Brewster.
We will now start the poll so that members of the Antiquarian Society can vote in response to the motion to accept the slate of nominees to the nominating committee. You should see the poll on your screen and you can select yes, no, or abstain. If there are two PAS members using the same device, the second member should vote yes, no, or abstain on question 2. If you are the only PAS member using your device, you must select NA or question 2 before submitting your response. If you are not a member, please do not submit any response to the poll. We will verify the results of the election when the poll is completed.
All right, thank you all for your patience. We had 43 members who responded in that second poll for the nominating committee election. And again, we can see from the votes as we've received them so far that we have people in favor of passing the slate of nominees as presented. And so we will verify those results after the meeting, but at this point we can say that the nominating committee for 2022 has been approved.
We will now hear a report from our treasurer, Charles Beautrain.
Okay. All right.
It sounds like Charlie is
Hello.
getting
Yeah, that's
started.
okay. I'm here. I just was surprised I couldn't open the video.
Okay, here I
as
can
you-
help you with that, Charlie.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
There we are.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I've been a resident of the town since 1973, and I've been the treasurer now for 2 or 3 years. So the Antiquarian Society's fiscal year 2021 began on October 1st, 2020, and ended on September 30th, 2021. Given the, excuse me, given the uncertainty surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic, the Board of Trustees was conservative in setting the fiscal year 2021 operating budget at $172,300. We anticipated that we would not be able to return to a pre-pandemic level of operation, but we did hope that some in-person activities would resume. We had estimated that our total operating income, including membership dues, annual appeal gifts, corporate sponsorship, program and event revenue, admissions, and gift shop sales would be $92,000. Our actual income was $119,837.82, almost $30,000 more than estimated. Our total operating expense was $167,794.30, about $4,500 less than anticipated. At our most recent meeting, the Board of Trustees voted to engage Cosby and Company, a firm of certified public accountants in Plymouth, to complete our financial review for 2021. We hope that complete fiscal statements will be available for our members in early 2022. It is due to your generosity that we are able to sustain our mission of preserving and sharing local history. Thank you very much. Hope you have a good day.
Thank you, Charlie. Well, this will be my last meeting as president. It has been a privilege and an honor to serve this organization for the last 4 years. I would like to take a moment to thank all of you for your generous support and contributions. Through this second year of COVID-19 pandemic, you have made it possible for us to continue preserving and sharing Plymouth's history. I would like to thank our corporate sponsors, who can be seen listed on the screen. When we launched this campaign at the beginning of 2021, our goal was to bring in $10,000 to support our operating budget. We were overwhelmed by the generosity of 31 local businesses and individuals who in total contributed $17,800. Their sponsorship supported a full year of virtual and in-person programs and events. Antiquarian Society members were also incredibly generous this year, giving a total of $23,458 to our annual appeal, almost $7,000 more than we anticipated. In addition, members of the Board of Trustees gave a total of $5,375. Thank you. Without the intellectual, physical, and financial support of so many, the grace and beauty of the 1809 Hedge House, the treasures and traditions of the 1749 Spooner House, and the colonial crafts and hand-on experiences of the 1677 Hollow House would be lost for all time. Last but not least is Sacrifice Rock on Old Sandwich Road. We are working with the Wampanoags to tell the most authentic story of this site. I extend a special thank you for my Board of Trustees and the chairs of the committees of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society, who worked tirelessly to ensure we achieve our mission. In particular, I would like to acknowledge the leadership of Kate Angley, Recording Secretary and Chair of the Collection Committee, Susan Fessenden, Chair of Nominating and Sponsorship Committee, Charles Vautrain, Treasurer and Chair of the Preservation Committee, John Reynolds, Chair of Finance and Investment Committee, Martha Sawyer, Chair of the Education Committee, David Calori, Chair of the Revived Audit Committee, which is responsible for reviewing the year-end independent financial review of the Society's accounts. Kudos to David, who not only agreed to chair this committee, but also worked with the Executive Director, Ann Mason, to create a document that clearly outlines the committee's responsibilities and processes. David also recruited members to join the committee, including 2 local accountants. They helped to keep the board and management accountable to the society's membership. This year, the board continued to work with the Standards and Excellence Program for history organizations. This is a self-assessment program developed by the American Association of State and Local History that helps small organizations benchmark themselves against national museum standards. One of the core documents for museums is a code of ethics, which is a statement of values that informs the behavior and practice of all board members, staff, and volunteers. Out of a desire to be an organization that maintains integrity and deserves public confidence, we formed a committee to create a code of ethics for the society. Kate Butler, a member of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society, was the chair of this committee. She brought her writing and editorial skills to the task. The Code of Ethics was adopted by the board in May of 2021. In closing, I would like to thank my husband, Carl Eckberg, for being the wind beneath my wings, my elder daughter, Beth Davis, for being a bronze sponsor, and younger daughter, Nancy Davis, for her famous blueberry and peach pies for the bake table at the Antiquarian Fair, and her amazing bows for any occasion, and also for general helping me out behind the scenes. All became life members in 2019. I owe a special thanks to our executive director, Dr. Ann Mason, for her unwavering leadership, to the Board of Trustees who have supported me with their collective wisdom and made the transition to virtual meetings possible, and to our docents and volunteers for their flexibility, creativity, and dedication. I will still be around as a lead docent at the Harlow Ford House and as a member of the Collection and Education Committee. And it is with great confidence that I will be handing my gavel to Andrea Daly as the incoming president. I will end with the words of Robert Frost. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Now, with great pleasure, I invite our executive director, Dr. Ann Mason, to share the many accomplishments of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society during this last year. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ginny. And I really wish that we were doing this annual meeting in person, because you certainly deserve a standing ovation from all of us, from your board members, from your committee members, from the staff and volunteers and all of the Antiquarian Society members, because Ginny, you have been just such an inspirational leader. You have been personally, and I didn't think I was going to choke up, but you have been such a huge encouragement personally to me. And I want to thank you for your tireless dedication to the Antiquarian Society, not just during your term as president, but also throughout the years that you have been a life member for so many years. And from, just throughout every year, every moment, anything you engaged with, you always gave it your whole heart. And you have brought so many people into the Antiquarian Society, and we all very, very much deeply appreciate you. And we are so delighted that you are still going to be serving in different capacities, and in some of the same capacities that you have been in. But just to toot Ginny's horn a little bit, because she won't do it herself, but she has actually attended pretty much every single committee meeting of every single committee since she's been president. And that is something that is not required, but she loves this organization so much that she has given so much of her time to do that, and to be present and to understand what's going on behind the scenes, and to understand how the organization is working. And so, Ginny, thank you for that dedication. And I do see so many comments on the coming in through the chat, and I know that everyone else who's here certainly appreciates what you've done, and everyone who knows you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that, I'll proceed just to give a sort of overview of some of the wonderful things that we have been able to accomplish this year. And again, one of our primary goals for 2021 was to continue our outreach to members, to residents here in Plymouth, and to folks around the country who love history and want to learn about Plymouth's history. And so we were delighted in 2020 with everything else going on that we were able to connect with so many people virtually. And we said, well, the pandemic is continuing. We're going to continue to have these virtual programs, even though normal operations were somewhat disrupted. So in February, we launched Lunchtime Conversations, which is a new virtual series exploring local history. So for once a month, for 6 months, we offered this program as a Zoom webinar, and then we also streamed it to Facebook. So probably many of you have tuned in to those programs. We featured local experts, including food historian Paula Marcoux and textile conservator Kate Tarleton. And for actually the programs that were held in May, June, and July, we received a Bridge Street grant from Mass Humanities to support their creation. And so you can see on the left side of the screen, I've posted a screenshot of our YouTube channel. So we do have a YouTube channel, and you can watch our lunchtime conversations there, or you can go to our website, PlymouthAntiquarian.org/virtual to see all of our virtual programs there as well. And then on the right, I've added a little graphic of our first Saturday history tours, which we were able to continue presenting virtually in 2021. So this was a relaunch of our very popular Burial Hill Tour series, a relaunch as a virtual tour series, which was presented in partnership with Pilgrim Hall Museum. And we presented those programs the first Saturday of every month except January. And so we're so thankful again that we were able to continue that educational outreach virtually this year. And do go and watch them if you've missed any. We were even more excited when we were able to reopen our 3 historic houses for guided tours, for in-person programs and events. And I wanted to thank the people who work behind the scenes in some cases, but who are always there to make sure that we can open our houses and greet the public. And so you see listed on the screen our docents. We have paid staff who work at the at the Spooner House and the Hedge House. Their names are there: Vicki Harrington, Barbara Keys, Sophie Kuntz, Joyce Premsky, and Robin Tozzi. And then at the Harlow House, we have an all-volunteer team. So led by Jenny Davis, it includes Jim and Leslie Lyman, Steve Mattern, and Janet Mead. And so they are there every week providing not just a tour of the house, but also hands-on demonstrations of spinning and weaving in our classroom. We also have been fortunate to have volunteers who greet at our service greeters at our historic home. So Kate Angley has done that for some of our special events, and then Janet Lincoln at the Spooner House. And we are fortunate that we have a wonderful horticulturalist, Bob Hoxie, who takes care of the Spooner House and the Hedge House Gardens. And we also have volunteers, Nancy Humphrey at the Harlow House and Harold and Marilyn Taylor at the Spooner House, who help with all of the care and maintenance of our beautiful gardens. And then last but certainly not least, I am fortunate to work with some terrific individuals on the office end of things. So Di Maudlin Hoxie is our graphic designer, Joyce Premsky, who is a docent but also helps as office assistant, and Natalie Shaw, our bookkeeper. So thank you to all of them for their work this year. And again, it's been a year when we've had to be very flexible, and sometimes things happen unexpectedly, and they are an incredible team taken together who make it possible to continue our mission. I also have a poster on the right side of the screen to highlight a new downtown initiative that we were able to to participate in, the First Friday Art Walk. So this was in partnership with Inky Hands Print Studio and the Plymouth Center for the Arts and other cultural organizations. We were open at the Hedge House from 5 to 8 p.m. every first Friday of the month, starting in May and ending in October. And this was really a chance for us to connect with, in particular, Plymouth residents who may be out and about enjoying our wonderful downtown and waterfront, maybe going out for a meal at one of our fantastic restaurants and then stopping in for a free mini tour of the Hedge House. We saw many people who had never visited before. They got to see the house. And we also every month had a different theme that we highlighted. So we created mini exhibits and had objects from our collection that we often don't see because they might be in storage, or maybe they're on display, but we don't usually talk about them in a regular tour. So we pulled those out and created these themed tours, which just was a lot of fun to be able to do that. We also have collaborated in a number of different ways with the Plymouth Bay Cultural District. And I am highlighting here our Plymouth Yarn Pop, which is a public art display. And the idea was to create all sorts of gardens out of knitted, crocheted, all sorts of, and any kind of fabric or yarn creations that were on display at different cultural venues throughout town. And the Hedge House was one of the premier locations for a display. And we actually were able to repurpose the beautiful red poppies that had been created for our World War I 100th anniversary display on the Hedge House lawn in 2018. So many of you may have contributed to that project, and we reused the flowers so that we created our own flower garden climbing up the Hedge House, which was on display the month of May. And I've noted here the people who were on the decorating team, and you can see some of them in that photograph, but we were fortunate that we have so many creative people to create this fun installation at the Hedge House, which again was just a way to participate in a wider community engagement. And then we also partnered with the Plymouth Bay Cultural District and another organization, the Community Art Collaborative, to create what is called In This Together. And so this is a Plymouth town-wide public art display where members of the community are creating pieces of artwork that are then being displayed in different types of installations, all using the honeycomb shape. And so we were approached to have an installation on the Hedge House lawn, and that you can see it, a photograph of it on the screen here. That was installed for the summer, and it was actually taken down for some restoration work, minor restoration work that needed to happen, and it's now on display not on the Hedge House lawn but on the lawn of the town hall on Court Street, which is another great way for it to be seen. But we highlighted in this public art display stories from Plymouth's past around the theme of perseverance. And we actually had Stephen Delbos, who is the Plymouth Poet Laureate, come, and he spoke. He wrote some poems for the occasion, and he read his poetry. And we had Angelica Vendetti from Plymouth Violins, who came and played in with Stephen. And so it was just a very moving performance when the unveiling happened. And again, just another great way to share local history in a new format. We also were able to go back in person for our Exploring Plymouth History Summer Program. And we had a fantastic group of educators who created this year's program, including Jenny Davis, Leslie Lyman, Janet Mead, Christine Sampson, and Martha Solia. And we had the program at the Harlow House, where we have a classroom that we can use for all sorts of great activities. It was a week-long program. And we created journals, as you can see here in this photograph. We went on different walking tours of downtown Plymouth, including to Burial Hill, where the students were able to look at these wonderful artifacts in that open air museum and sketch them and learn a little bit about memorial art. We learned how to write with quills and using using traditional ink materials. And last but not least, one of the very favorite activities of the students in our program was to use the looms that we had actually purchased, thanks to many of you who gave a gift in memory of longtime PAS member Monica Donnellan, who passed away. And we collected donations in her memory and used them to buy 14 new looms for our classroom, and they were first put to use for our summer program. And in the picture on the right, you can see our students with their completed projects that they worked on all week, and they absolutely loved weaving on those looms. It was really a wonderful hands-on experience for them. So we just love being able to once again have young history lovers on our properties and be encouraging them to learn about the past. I had the very good fortune to work with Sophie Kuntz, who is a student at Smith College. She grew up in Plymouth, and she reached out to me about an internship in the winter. So this winter she worked with me and then returned as a docent in the summer. But one of Sophie's major projects was to select and transcribe letters from the Spooner collection. And then she took some of those letters and created an online exhibit that highlighted the family story. And so you can see here that exhibit is still up on our website, PlymouthAntiquarian.org/Spooner-letters. And so this is just really a wonderful way to go, and a wonderful place to not only read the letters, but also learn about, sort of the snapshot of Plymouth's history in that moment in time. And we added photographs, if we had them, of the letter writers. We added other visual items that sort of helped you understand the text, and as well as annotations, so that anything that was perhaps a little bit confusing, we were able to hopefully define or identify for the readers. So this is the example of a project that we would love to continue, and just to be able to share some other materials from our archival collections. The collections committee has been working very, very hard to, and again, meeting virtually in the winter and spring, and then some meetings in person more recently. But we are really addressing the intellectual access that is available to our collection. Can people, find out what is in our collection? Do we have it inventory? Do we have it cataloged? Do we have items photographed? And so we did invest in Past Perfect, which is a collections management software. And so we have Sophie, our intern, worked on the catalog, and Kate Angley, who is chair of the collections committee, has continued with helping with uploading photographs to different records. But we've just been starting to go through photographing objects that have not been photographed, adding them into the database with the goal of having everything in there, so that we can, again, have that intellectual control and provide access to these objects, so that we know what's in our collection and we can use it for educational and exhibition purposes. So here is just a screenshot to give you a taste of what that program does. Again, it's a place where we can have all of the information on an object and photographs, and very easily search for specific objects, or search for objects of a certain type. This is one of our favorite objects. It's a suit that was a dress and jacket suit combo that was worn by one of the Blessington sisters here in Plymouth, and they were longtime members of the Antiquarian Society, and this is something that came to our collection. And we're just delighted that we have it and that we're able to share it, and again, getting it in the database is the first step to eventually sharing it in another format, perhaps a future virtual program. I also wanted to thank the collections committee, the preservation committee, for their work this year. We had a number of big projects that were completed. Here are photographs of the new roofs on our outbuildings at the Harlow House. So we have our classroom building on the left and our kitchen bathroom building on the right. And those buildings were really in need of new roofs, which we were able to put on in this fiscal year. And then we also had volunteers, and primarily Carl Leckberg, who helped rebuild our steps at the classroom, and then also actually took off the existing cupboards on one side of the bathroom building and replaced them. So as you can see right here in this photograph. And then we had other volunteers who worked on other repair projects, Dave Harper, and then Dave and David Calori and Charlie Votrain, who's chair of the committee, also went back then and cleaned and stained the woodwork, the trim. So everything over at the Harlow House is really just looking really lovely. And so we're so thankful that we're able to care for these buildings in this way. And it really is only possible through the time and talent that is donated by our volunteers. We also I mentioned at our last annual meeting that we had received a grant to paint the Spooner House, and that painting was completed in this fiscal year. And again, we have volunteers, Dave Harper, Charlie Beautrain, and David Clory, who volunteered to rehang the shutters, and that Dave Harper had actually painted. So we have now, the house is beautifully painted with its shutters and looking better than it has in a number of years. We've continued to address masonry issues at the Spooner House on the east end, so not the wall that you're seeing, but the other side of the house. So that is an ongoing project, but we're thankful that, again, we're able to continue this work step by step, and have our houses well cared for. And finally, to help us achieve our goal of creating a long-range preservation plan for the Society's properties, we applied for a systems replacement plan grant from the Massachusetts Cultural Facilities Fund, which is administered by Mass Development and the Mass Cultural Council. And we were awarded a $12,500 grant, which will help us prioritize capital maintenance needs and develop a 20-year plan for our properties. Now, long-term planning is of utmost importance, so that we are able to look ahead, raise funds, and prepare contracts in time to address issues like broken furnaces or furnaces that need to be replaced, roofs that need to be replaced. And this way we will not be deferring maintenance. We'll be keeping our 3 historic houses in their best condition. And I chose a photograph of the hedge house for this slide because we have actually just finished painting or having contractors paint the hedge house, the front of the hedge house this month. And again, that's the kind of project that we need to budget, and we need to schedule regular paint maintenance at all of our properties. And that's one of the items that would be included in the systems replacement plan, because paint is one of those systems that tends to wear out and has to be replaced and again planned for that big project. It provides protection for historical wooden features, and of course helps to prevent leaks into the house. So we're thankful that we're able to do paint maintenance on the hedge house this year, and we're asking you to help us reach our goal. So before we can actually begin moving forward with the administration of the systems replacement plan grant and have the 20-year plan created, we do need to match the grant funding. So we need to raise $12,500. We received it from the Massachusetts Cultural Facilities Fund. They need to have that documented that we've matched it before we can actually hire someone to create the 20-year plan for us. And you can go on our website, PlymouthAntiquarian.org/2021-grant, and make a donation right there to this campaign. And we are asking, since this annual meeting program has been offered free of charge, like all of our virtual programs, we would really appreciate that if you'd like to express your thanks for the virtual program, that you would make a donation to this campaign, since this is something we're really hoping to move forward as soon as we can in 2022. Now, before I finish, I just wanted to highlight one upcoming event that's happening at the Hedge House. We are once again participating in the Plymouth Area Chamber of Commerce's and the Plymouth Bay Cultural District's Hometown Stroll. So the photograph you see is from last year when we participated in this event, which will be held December 3rd to 5th throughout the downtown and waterfront. We will be decorating the Hedge House and holding a pop-up shop on Saturday, December 4th and Sunday, December 5th from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. each day. So we're hoping that you, our members, and anyone who's interested can stop by, can have a chance to see the decorated Hedge House, come inside, maybe find it's a very eclectic stock of holiday decorations and gift items. So you might find just the right thing for someone in your life to give them this holiday season. And we will also have a very special guest. Mrs. Claus is coming to the Hedge House, so she will be there to greet visitors as well on December 4th and 5th. So with that, I will turn the meeting back over to President Ginny Davis. But again, thank you so much to everyone who has supported the Antiquarian Society and who will continue to support the Antiquarian Society as we care for our historic houses and our collections and present local history programs to the public.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. Before concluding the meeting, I would like to give President-elect Andrea Daly an opportunity to greet you. Andrea's term as president will begin at the conclusion of this annual meeting.
Thank you, Jenny. And I also want to thank you for your service as well. Can you see me okay?
Yep, we can see you, Andrea.
Okay, great. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. And again, my name is Andrea Daly. And as your president-elect, I'd like to give you a little bit of information to introduce myself to those members and non-members who don't know me. I was born in Plymouth and raised here in Plymouth, fourth generation of the Berganzini and Pioppi family. I married here in Plymouth and raised my children, Michael and Alessandra. They were brought up around the Plymouth Antiquarian events, and as many other children whose parents and were members as well. When I joined the society in 1987, I basically was looking for adult conversation while I was an at-home mom, and here it is 34 years later, and I'm president-elect. I graduated from Lesley College, now known as Lesley University. I majored in education and minored in moderate special needs. I taught at the Cushing School in Hanover for 10 years, and then came back to Plymouth and was a permanent sub in the Plymouth school systems, as well as tutored children at home. Proposition 2.5 changed my focus on my teaching career, and I went into working for the real estate company called Relocation Resources at the time, and is now known as Weikert Workforce Mobility. I obtained my real estate license in 2012 and just celebrated 20 years with Weikert. I've written a book called The Abolitionists of Plymouth, which was published and is a walking tour of where the abolitionists lived here in Plymouth. And I'm also known for my biscottis. So within my 34 years as a member, I have been a trustee for this society for several boards under the presidency of Tony Provenzano, Annette Talbot, Mary Guidaboni, Rui Santos, Ron Lindeman, Rose Stearns, and Ginny Davis. I have many fond memories being in the mix of raising money for this society. What has been very meaningful are the people that I've met and the relationships acquired over the years being a member of PASS. I won't forget those first relationships working in the mix with Helen Belcher, Annette Talbot, Lillian Knowles, Dorothea Anderson, and Tom Barnes, and the Blessington sisters. My husband would always joke with me about volunteering with the Blue Hairs. God rest his soul, because back then we were in our 30s, and I invited my friends and family into many of the activities, which was decorating Christmas on North Street, the teddy bear picnic, and also the summer programs for their children. It was great memories, and keeping traditions was always close to my heart, whether it be for family or for the society. But going through COVID-19 in 2020, I found change can be good. Our celebrations in person became to be virtual, FaceTime, or online through Zoom or other computer programs to keep us connected. Today, COVID-19 cases are still a concern. PASS's ability to go with change and how we educate the public has been a great success thanks to our executive director, Dr. Ian Mason. She has created virtual programs and has had great topics and amazing participation from members and non-members. As an educator, a goal would be for me to continue to create virtual programs on our collections and house histories. I look forward in my new endeavor, that meant endeavor, keeping this society strong and visible. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And thank you all for attending this afternoon's annual meeting. We want to move right up now onto our special history presentation. So may I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Okay, may I have a second to the
Yep,
motion?
you have a motion from
Oh.
Charlie Vautrain and a second from Elizabeth Riley.
Okay. All right. If you're a member of the Antiquarian Society, please use your poll to vote on the motion to adjourn.
All right, and it looks like we have most of our members have responded, so I'm going to end that poll. And we have respondents in favor of adjourning the annual meeting.
All right. Thank you. The 102nd annual meeting of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society is officially concluded at, and I would say, 2 p.m. I'll now turn the program over to our executive director, who will facilitate the presentation. Thank you, Dr.
Oh, thank you, Ginny. Now, I know that we are, we're running a little bit longer than we thought. We had a later start just as we were waiting for everyone to come in for a quorum, but thank you for still being here with 105 attendees at the meeting today. And we are ready to move into our history presentation. I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen so that I can invite Belinda Brewster, who is our one of our Board of Trustees members, and was just actually elected to as an officer of the organization, and she is going to be presenting or introducing our speaker for this afternoon. So we can, Sue, if you would like to also come right back in, we'll be we're happy to have you join us at this time. Thank you, everyone who's been who is not a member of the Antiquarian Society, but has been listening as we got through our meeting. So now we're able to move right into our presentation. I'll turn it over to you, Belinda.
Thank you, Anne. I'm honored to introduce you to my friend, Sue Allan. For almost 2 decades, Sue has been engrossed in the subject of the Mayflower Pilgrims. Her interest peaked while exploring the subject for her debut novel, Mayflower Maid, in 2005. And from these unexpected beginnings, her interest has deepened and matured to such an extent that she today is recognized for her groundbreaking Mayflower research. She has also received critical acclaim for the numerous nonfiction books and articles she has published based on that research. Her latest book is called In the Shadow of Men, which gives a more complete historical account of the brave women pilgrims who settled our shores. Apart from authoring 5 novels and 10 nonfiction books, Sue has appeared in and advised upon numerous film and TV projects relating to the subject of the Mayflower Pilgrims, including Who Do You Think You Are, USA, Kirk Cameron's Monumental, BBC Coast, PBS Rick Burns's Pilgrims, Channel 5's Great British Ships, as well as numerous radio appearances in both the US and UK. Sue is also the official historian for Scrooby Manor, the English home of William Brewster. She is currently researching the life of Pilgrim James Chilton, father of Mary Chilton, who Chiltonville here in Plymouth is named for. I first met Sue 7 years ago when my husband, Wrestling Brewster, was asked to speak at a 400th event held at the Gainsborough Hall in Lincolnshire, England. Lincolnshire is where many of the Pilgrim families have hailed from. Sue gave us a wonderful tour, pointing out the many of the historic English churches of the Pilgrims and describing the separatist movement in England in greater detail. I was fortunate enough to go back to England in 2019 with a group of friends, and we met up with Sue again in Scrooby, where we visited All Saints Church in Babworth, where Richard Clifton, the great separatist minister, preached. John Robinson was the assistant pastor to Clifton at All Saints, and the separatist church met secretly at William Brewster's house at Scrooby Manor, with Richard Clifton preaching. Sue shared with us many fascinating details of Richard Clifton's work and life in England. Honestly, Sue could give a graduate level course on the separatist movement. Sue also came to Plymouth in 2019 to speak at a lecture series at the Mayflower Society House, and she came to worship with us at my church, Chiltonville Congregational Church, which is one of the daughter churches of the Pilgrim's First Church here in Plymouth. Sue is an absolutely delightful and warm person, a brilliant and knowledgeable conversationalist, and dedicated to her mission of discovering more about the English life of the Pilgrims through her dogged research into original sources and documents. You can buy Sue's books at AmericanAncestors.org. Sue lives with her husband in a 400-year-old cottage in Lincolnshire, about a half-an-hour drive from Scrooby Manor. Sue, welcome to the Plymouth Antiquarian Society annual meeting. I personally am so pleased to have you here and know that everyone who hears you today is going to come away much more knowledgeable about the Pilgrims and especially the Pilgrim women. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be asked to be with you, and I'm absolutely thrilled. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Sue. And so for the first part of this presentation, Sue has actually very graciously recorded a video for us. And so we're going to now share her video presentation. And that way we don't have to worry about any technical difficulties during that content being shared with you. So we'll get through the video and then Sue come back on in order to answer your questions. So if you have questions about what you hear in her presentation, or if you have general questions about her research and work, save them for the end after the video, and again using that Q&A feature so that you can type in your question and send it over, and I will share those questions with Sue when we're ready for them. So here we go. We're going to start the video now.
There were some 18 married women aboard the Mayflower. And by the end of the first winter in the New World, there would only be 5 of those remaining alive. And come spring, one of those, Catherine Carver, would also die.
meaning that by the time of the first Thanksgiving, there were just four adult women alive. And yet, what do we really know about any of the women aboard the Mayflower? For some of them, we know their married names. For a few, we know where they were born and their families. But for the vast majority, we simply don't even know that. For some of them, they're not even named. We don't know their first name. It seems so cruel. History's forgotten them. And yet, why should that be? Why have they been almost forgotten about? Or perhaps airbrushed out of the story altogether? One of the main difficulties in researching women from that far ago is they don't tend to have an identity of their own. They're always somebody's wife, somebody's widow. And in legal documents, they're just not there as much as men are. If a parish register survives from where they were born, their birth might be recorded, their marriage, who they married, family members, and their burials. Other than that, most of the women just disappear. In legal terms, they don't really exist. When they married, they joined with their husbands and became one legal entity, his. You see, married women didn't have very many rights. They couldn't own their own property. They didn't even have ownership over their children. I mean, in England, it's not uncommon if a husband died, any children would go to the husband's family because they were his property and not hers. Sometimes they were taken completely out of her care. It must have been heartbreaking to have so few legal rights throughout your life. And then when you faced death, if you were a married woman, you had to ask your husband if you could make a will. You might not have much. You might have your favourite gowns. You might have a few jewels, a few personal possessions that you want to hand on, maybe to your sisters or to your daughters. But you had to have your husband's permission to even do that. The only time life might get better for you as a married woman, if you were married to a man of property, is when he died. That way you were entitled to a legally recognised share of his estate, to your jointure. And you could own property. You could own your own property if you were a widow and decide what to do with it. Only for as long as you didn't remarry. If you remarried, then you were back to square one. Your property came under the control of your husband. So all in all, a women's lot 400 years ago was not an entirely happy one, legally speaking. But it's not only the law that was against women. There was also the church. Women, according to the church, were the root of all evil. After all, there was a woman that had mankind cast out of the Garden of Eden. That was a burden that all women had to bear. They were all guilty of that one act. Women carried the blame for so many things that went wrong in life. I mean, women's bodies were different from men, naturally, but not in the way we would interpret it. Women were inferior to men. They had the same body. They were made the same way. It's just that somehow, in women, the genitalia of a man were inverted, turned inside out. So a woman was the same as a man, but inferior. She was made as an inferior being. And not only that, women's bodies were known to run hot. Women were licentious creatures. Women were open to rampant desires for sex and for dragging men into sordid situations which were not of their making, but of the woman's. This is how the church perceived women. When you had a child, after childbirth, you were unclean. You needed to be churched so that you could be cleansed of this action. And when you were married, you and your husband couldn't just have nookie whenever you wanted. No. There were certain restrictions set upon you by the church, certain days of the year, of the week even, of the month, when you weren't allowed to partake in sex. It was dictated by the church. Now, I'm not certain how they policed that, but the laws were there, the rules that had to be abided by. And if you were a pious person, you would not want to go against the church, would you? It's these sort of attitudes against women that just permeated society. Can you imagine that from yay high? Little girls and the boys alongside them growing up were taught this. Women were inferior. Women were taught that they had to subjugate themselves to their male counterparts, whether it was their brothers, their fathers, their uncles. You obeyed them immediately. You learnt that from a very early age. You always obeyed a man. And by the time you get to be a woman, if you've had this day in and day out since you were a child, you obeyed instinctively whatever you were told to do. It was just the way life was. You obeyed men, and men expected you to obey. And so part of this is, if you like, down to women's attitudes about themselves as well. Now, John Knox may have held these views about women. Lots of luck there, making me obey. But when we come to our separatists, did they hold the same kind of views? We have very few insights into the separatist view of the role of women, but those that we do appear to be quite positive. John Robinson certainly held views upon women and countered this belief of people like John Knox with his own writings. Many marriages were abusive. Goes without saying, many marriages today are abusive, but in an era where you, as a woman, didn't usually choose your own husband. He was usually chosen for you by your male relatives. I'd hate to think who my brother would have chosen for me, but anyway, it left the door open for some very, very unhappy situations for women. Now, the view of the church was that if you tried to live apart from your husband, you would be forced to return. It just wasn't acceptable. You had married, you had to remain under the same roof as that man, even if he was beating the living daylights out of you. And it's interesting that in my research into Susanna White, I found a letter which was written by her father, Richard Jackson, to Richard Jackson's brother, who at that time wasn't living near Scrooby in Lincolnshire, but some 60 odd miles away in a place called Spalding. That's right down the other end of the county of Lincolnshire. Lincolnshire's the second largest county in England, so it was a fair distance. You couldn't get there easily. It wasn't doable in a day. It would probably take 4 or 5 days to get there. But this letter was quite amazing. One, because it was full of loving terms. From other letters, we know that Richard Jackson was extremely fond of his brother, Robert Jackson, and they had a very loving relationship. Both were good Christian men. And Richard Jackson was a separatist. And in this one particular letter, he's writing to his brother, pleading with him to try to take in their sister Jane, who had been suffering terrible, prolonged mental and physical abuse from her husband. He's asking his brother to go against the church. Please take in our sister. Find some kind friend who will have her. Richard also said that there were friends nearby who would take her, but they lived too close to her husband William, and he would simply go and drag her back home again if he found her. Richard says that whatever little thing he gave to his sister, whether it was clothes or some money, her husband would immediately take it away from her. He feared for her. She was getting old. She couldn't go on like that for much longer. I also know that from later research that Robert must have taken their sister in at Spalding, because many, many years later, her name appears in the parish register, and it says, wife of William Jackson. And the town where they lived. So we know it was her. And I find that quite comforting. Quite comforting indeed. But it's many passages in John Robinson's writing where you find that there is this respect of women. And so I think probably they had a much better life or lot in life than their non-separatist counterparts. Again, looking at the attitude towards women, one of the areas which explains the lack of information on them is the early histories of the Mayflower. Many of these were written in the 1800s when attitudes towards women were very much the same as they were 400 years ago. In the 1800s, women still couldn't own property. They still had very few rights in law. And this is reflected in the writings of that time. And the problem is that these books became the go-to information for generations. They're quoted from all through the 20th century, and even into the 21st century, these books are still being quoted. And unfortunately, the attitude towards women is still there. It may be very subliminal, but it is there. And it's carried forward as if by default. It's not been questioned. And it can still colour the writings of today. One male historian once told me that I could research the women all I liked, but it wasn't going to change Pilgrim history. And you know, he was right, because finding out more about the women will not change the sequence of events in that story. But what it might do is give us a better understanding of the events behind that story. And I am a firm believer in that. And I believe my research has begun to show that. For example, I would like to take just 3 women from the story of the Mayflower. 3 separatist women: Dorothy May Bradford, Susanna White Winslow, and Elizabeth Barker Winslow. All 3 women we now know were separatists in their own right. They weren't just adorning their husbands as ornaments. They were separatists through and through, and not merely because of their husbands. We've also been able to see that separatists went in for marriages with other separatists. They married women not for their good looks, for their property portfolios, but for their religious credentials. They weren't just looking for a wife. They weren't just looking for someone to bear them children. They were looking for spiritual helpmates. And this sort of marriage is called endogamous. An endogamous marriage. I know that's a very, very hard term to sort of wrap your mind around, and you'll probably forget it quite quickly. But I have come up with a little aid memoir so that you will never forget that term, endogamous. John Robinson also had a lot to say about marriage. I really can't recommend his writings more highly, especially when it comes to personal relationships. He was a man who's been very underrated. Very, very wise man. He must have been a joy of a man to know. Kind, understanding, firm, but only for his congregation's own good. But his writings are amazing. And this is what he says about endogamous marriage. Now let's return to Dorothy, Susanna, and Elizabeth, because all three of those were separatists, but not quite the same brand of separatist, and not all of them were members of John Robinson's congregation. If we look at Dorothy May was in fact Pilgrim William White's niece. Her father, Henry May, was one of the leaders in the ancient Brethren Church in Amsterdam. Slightly different setup to the congregation at Leyden, different spiritual leaders, but very similar in mindset. And we know that there were intermarriages between the two congregations because Dorothy May married William Bradford. The same can be said of Elizabeth Barker. Elizabeth Barker was a separatist, but she had been a separatist since she was born. In Suffolk, she lived in East Bergholt. Her parents, Samuel and his wife Sarah, had just two daughters. Elizabeth was the eldest, a younger daughter Mary, and unfortunately Elizabeth's mother probably died shortly after the birth of her sister. Now, Samuel Barker then remarried. He married a woman called Elizabeth. And when Samuel died, Elizabeth took on and continued the upbringing of Samuel's two daughters as separatists, because in her own right, she was hauled before the authorities for more than a decade for being a recusant, for not attending Church of England services. And in fact, at one point, she was excommunicated. Now, when Elizabeth Barker, that's Samuel's daughter, our pilgrim, when she reaches the age of 15 or 16, she is expected to make her own decisions in life and to do the right thing and to attend the Church of England. But she too refuses. And so her name appears in the lists of recusants, of Brownists, who are refusing to go to church. Now, after the death of her stepmother, and sadly her sister, it appears that Elizabeth Barker made her way via Amsterdam to Leyden. Probably she was in search of a close family friend who she'd been brought up with at East Bergholt and who were close neighbours of her own parents, and that was the family of Isaac Allerton. And so Elizabeth Barker, with no more family ties in England, makes her way to Leyden, where she marries Edward Winslow. And when we look at Susanna White, William White, the pilgrim, his wife, she also has strong separatist credentials, because we discovered that her father was Richard Jackson of Scrooby Manor. In fact, he was the bailiff and receiver at Scrooby Manor early on in the reign of King James. Now, we don't know when Susanna came to the Netherlands, but as she married William White, she was almost certainly a member of the ancient Brethren Church as well, because William White's half-brother was Henry May, and they were known to be members of the ancient Brethren Church. They were citizens of Amsterdam. So we clearly have endogamous marriages. We have marriages between the two congregations, people moving between Leyden and Amsterdam. But also, if Susanna White and William White weren't members of the Leyden congregation, we can't find them there. But there were other Whites in Leyden, so that muddies the waters a little bit. who were known members of Robinson's congregation, at least they must have been close, because they too end up on the Mayflower. Looking at just these three women actually outlines the strength of this connection between separatists. They may not have come via the same route, but they were all separatists. They had the same mindset, and they intermarried. Before researching these three women, before finding their family roots and being able to prove this and the connections between them, Dorothy May, the niece of William White, Susanna, having been brought up at Scrooby, without knowing this, we might have thought that these are just three random women. There's nothing to be found out about them to bring to the table that will make any difference to the story. And yet, the more we research the women, the more we are liable to find ties between these pilgrims that weren't expected before. Interconnections which just weave in and out of the story and just bring more definition to it, more understanding to what was going on. Why were these folk together? How did they come in contact with each other? What inter-family relationships were there? It just put some of the flesh onto the bones. I always thought, looking at those older histories, that the reason that they didn't mention these women, their backgrounds, their families, was because they'd been researched, and with a lack of documents, there simply wasn't much to find out about them. But the more I've continued with this, and with my colleague Caleb Johnson, the more we're finding out that, there's so much more to learn by looking at the women, and yet I have that sneaky suspicion that they never were researched in the past, that no one dug too deeply into their lives because they were women. And that's a great, great, great shame. Because, if we only have the voices of the men, we only have the male identities, we only have the male voices in the story of the Mayflower history, then that's exactly what we have. His story. Half the story. And this is why I think it's important that we continue, and I certainly am, with our research into all of the women on the Mayflower. Not just those that have been identified as members of, say, John Robinson's congregation, the saints, if you like. We need to be looking more at the other women labelled strangers, because some of those I think we're going to find are also from strongly religious families. There may not be this black and white line between saints and strangers. I think there's quite a degree of crossover there, and this is what we are beginning to find. Research into the women's important, not just because I'm a woman. I'm not a feminist. I just believe that all voices should be heard, and that these women have a lot to bring to the table in the way of understanding the story better, but only if we look at them.
Well, thank you so much, Sue, for that presentation. And I'd love to have you join us back on the Zoom. And there you are. And so we can continue now with the Q&A part of the program. So I am going to actually start us off, since I do have a question that I'd love for you just to talk through with us. And that is, how have you been doing your research? And, you know, because we talking about, you know, that this research has not been done before in a lot of cases. And how do you go about, where do you start? And particularly maybe, where do you start in lockdown, since you have been in lockdown for a year and a half plus now? So.
Yes, that's true. And I apologize for the lockdown hair. I've not left my cottage for over a year and a half, but I have carried on research. It has been difficult. The archives were also closed and still only have limited opening. And a lot of the information that I'm looking for can't be found online because it's never been read before. So it has been challenging, but it's a case of thinking outside of the box. And this is what I do. And apart from that, I'm a genealogist. So when I'm researching someone, if I don't know the woman, I look at the husband. I go through all some of my trees have 500 people in them related to a pilgrim. And you just trust that you're going to get lucky and find that nugget of information that will move your research on. And it's amazing how often that happens.
Right. So you just never know which nugget might come across your path. And I know when we were preparing for this presentation, you were talking about how you like to go back and see the original documents for what other people have already looked at. You want to see them for yourself.
I think that's very important. I never take anything that's published at face value, even if it's by somebody that I know and respect and admire. I want to see the documents. I want to read them for myself and come to my own conclusion. And so, yes, I start from scratch with a clean slate and do what we know about a certain person over again, just to make sure nothing has been missed out. And you know, quite often things have been missed out.
So we have a question from Belinda. She asked, do you think the Pilgrim women who came on the Mayflower were as committed to the venture as the men were?
I would think the separatist women were as committed to the venture as their men because of these endogamous marriages. They weren't beaten onto that ship, which might have happened with other voyages and other couples, because it was legal to beat your wife back then. It was just the case of the size of the stick you beat her with, but it was quite legal. And I don't think that there were any of the Pilgrim women forced into that journey, because they had that same spiritual mindset. And all of the separatist women I have studied, and these include others at Leyden who didn't go on the Mayflower, looking at John Robinson's wife, looking at ancient brethren wives as well. We have this endogamous marriage, and these women were separatists already. Their parents may have been nonconformists. So yes, you are going to want to go into this venture with your men. You might be afraid. I mean, that's natural to be afraid that, you know, something dreadful will happen on this journey, and you might voice that. And we know that some of the women did voice this, but they still went.
Well, what is an example of someone voicing that? One of the women voicing.
We do know that when this was discussed, voices were, questions were, this is natural. Women could have an opinion amongst the separatists. We do know that, but if you're of the same mindset, there's not going to be any resistance, is there? Because ultimately you want the same thing as your husband and the rest of your congregation.
We have a couple of questions now about specific women, so we'll see if you can help us answer them. So one is, what about Sarah Alden? She was one of the survivors of the first year. What was her religious background?
Now, I haven't been able to look into her fully. She is on my to-do list, believe me. So come back later. Give me time. There's a lot of women for me to get through, and I'm going through them as quickly, as the records will allow. As I say, all of their voices need to be heard, and it will be so interesting to find out more about them.
I wonder, do you have a list of which women you'd like to research first, or do you let the documents take you? Maybe you find something that leads you in a certain direction.
Sometimes I let the documents take me in a certain direction. I mean, I have looked at Mary Norris, and I found some quite interesting things there, because I'm doing a follow-up book to In the Shadow of Men, whereas I'm desperately started to try to find out the name of the wife of James Chiltern. Everyone wants to know her name. But in looking at her, I found out so much about James Chiltern that's not been published before. I've been sort of sidetracked for the moment, but I will get back to the women. Sometimes a document, something will come up and you think, and it takes you off into a completely different direction. If these pilgrims want to be found, they don't seem to want to be found in any one order. So, and there's a lot of them, but rest assured, I will keep going, keep looking into them until I'm not here.
Well, two of the other women that folks are asking about are William Brewster's wife and John Billington's wife. So are those two in your books, or are they?
Yes, I would love to know about Mrs. Billington, because they're such an interesting couple. Maybe not for the right reasons at times, but yes, I'd like to know more about them. And Mary Brewster, of course, we'd always had this argument, it's Mary Wentworth, which isn't true, because I've researched the Wentworths. This came about because a bailiff and receiver at Scrooby was Thomas Wentworth. And a lot of people have said, yes, Mary Brewster must be Mary Wentworth, because this Thomas had a daughter. And the Wentworths are a very good family, because if you trace certain lines back, they're related to royalty. And that's really nice in American genealogists to have royalty. When in fact, the Wentworths at Scrooby were from a different branch anyway. And I've been able to trace the children of Thomas Wentworth. And I'm pretty certain I have his daughter Mary marrying someone else and dying. So she's not a Wentworth. There was never anything other than hearsay. But you have to look at her. William Brewster obviously had an endogamous marriage. So he either married a lady from a separatist family, a very forward Puritan separatist family in the Scrooby area, or he married someone from London, because he lived in London with William Davidson for quite some time. Davidson lived close to where the separatist hub in London was, and Davidson himself was a closet Presbyterian. So she's either from a family around the Scrooby area, that sort of area, maybe within a 20-mile radius, or she's from London. And I've looked at both, and I am still looking at both. So let's just hold fire. She may turn up, she may not, but at least you know where you should be looking.
Yes, that's a great insight that you sort of have to. Process of elimination is one of the methods, right? If we can say, well, is there someone here who might have been and people think might have been William Brewster's wife? Well, can we prove that she wasn't his wife? And then we can eliminate her from the lineup and move on to someone else.
But all we know, he could have been married twice. We don't even know that he only had one wife, William Brewster. You know, was the wife on the Mayflower the mother of Jonathan? We don't know. It's these unknowns we have to grapple with. But again, doing the genealogy with Brewster's tree, I have a huge tree for Brewster's family going sideways, and it runs into the hundreds. She's not there. So we'll find her if she wants to be found.
So one thing that you mentioned was just how, actually looking for these women can change what we know about the number of separatists actually on the Mayflower, if we count them, as having their own faith, right? If we think about them on their own terms. So one of our attendees today is wondering about the ratio of saints or separatists to strangers, so to speak, and thinking that when she notes that when she was a child in school, she was taught that the ratio was 50-50. So half of the passengers in the Mayflower were saints and half were strangers. And she notes that recently she's read that Robert Charles Anderson of the NEHDS, New England Historical and Genealogical Society, wrote that there were 69 passengers who were from or had close definable relationship with Leiden, and 35 who did not. So that's a 2/3 to 1/3 saints to strangers. And then Pilgrim historian Jeremy Bangs believe it is more like 80-20. So so what do you think is the question? How many on the Mayflower were separatists?
As I said before, there's not, I think with some of them, I've spoken to people about the saints and strangers. And it's very odd because a lot of American descendants of strangers have said, of course, my ancestors didn't agree with any of this, of what they were being told, and they were so strict. But the thing is, the church in England was strict anyway. But we don't know until we look at them all properly, is the answer. After all, I was told that William White would never be found. By Jeremy Bangs wrote he would never be found. And he was always considered to be a stranger, a merchant from London. But I found him, and he is a separatist, just a different brand from the Leiden separatists. Susanna was a separatist. Unless we look, we won't have the full picture. And this is why I think we need to look at the strangers more to see if some of them do. Some of them are non-conforming Puritans. There's a hair's breadth between the separatists and the non-conforming forward Puritans. So, yeah, research. If we think we know the whole story, we're kidding ourselves.
So one one of our audience members is wondering about the 4 women who survived, the 4 adult women who survived to the first Thanksgiving. So who were they?
But you've got Mrs. Billington for
Yep.
one of them. You've got Mary Brewster. Susanna White survived. And also, we had 5 survive because Catherine Carver survived, but then she died, didn't she, that first spring? So to have those, Elizabeth Hopkins, so, you know, to have these people, they must have been made of very, very strong stuff indeed. I don't think I would have survived. You really have to admire the courage of these women and what they went through. When you think there were 18 women, you went on that ship, there were 18 women, and you're one of 4 that's still alive that first summer. What would that do to you? The shock, they were amazing to get through and not just lie on the floor and give up.
Well, it's also, I always think, interesting to think about all the young women who survived and what maybe a burden there was on them, you know, to see their mothers or their aunts, you know, perish, and then to be there. And of course, we think of some of them who are orphaned, you know, young unmarried women. So quite remarkable.
They would have grown up into women very, very quickly with the responsibility that they had to shoulder. There were certain things that were expected to be done by women, and they would have had to have stepped. And look at all the younger children that were left. They would have been little mothers to those as well. Incredible, the strength of the weaker sex.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It must have shaped them, and yes, amazing women and young women. How any of them survived always amazes me anyway.
Yeah. So we have, again, just a couple of questions about specific women. So there's interest in Joan Hurst, who was the wife of John Tilley and mother of Elizabeth Tilley, and Isaac Allerton. Wondering if Isaac and his daughter, surviving daughter, Mary Allerton, were separatists.
Isaac Allerton was a separatist. Isaac Allerton came from East Bergholt in Suffolk. His parents are in the church records alongside Elizabeth Barker's parents for being nonconformists. So yes, Isaac Allerton was definitely a separatist, and he's a member of the Leyden congregation. So Isaac Allerton, the lady he married, I think when I publish what I know about her so far, that will add a bit more colour to that story as well. Yeah.
I think we must have a lot of descendants, yeah, of the Mayflower passengers on the program today, because I think they're very, very interested in specific family lines, which isn't surprising, because that's what's so exciting about one of the things that's exciting about your research, right, is that we can learn more about those family lines, especially if we are connected with them. That can be an extremely personal connection that's uncovered. So I was actually curious about, you know, where would you, so I think I had mentioned via email that we have our own sort of mystery, not related to the Mayflower, but William Harlow, who built the Harlow Old Fort House here in Plymouth, came from England, and we don't know when, and we don't know what ship he arrived on or where in England he came from. So I'm just intrigued by, you know, you were mentioning, well, we don't know until, you know, we don't know what we'll find. So we always sort of say, well, is there any hope that we'll find William Harlow somewhere? And where do you start with a question like that? Where would you start?
Well, I'm thinking about him. He's there pretty early because I think you said that the first record was it in the 1630s where there were a number of people mentioned?
I believe so. Yep.
In that case, if he's born, I think the consensus is around 1625, 26.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
If I remember it right.
Yes.
He wouldn't be mentioned in a document in the 30s because he's underage.
Oh.
So it's not him.
Hmm.
Because he's underage, you don't count. You don't have a saying anything. So who is the chap with his name in the area? That's the first thing I'd want to try to find out. The second thing is, what's he doing? Because my understanding is he's in the Plymouth area and must have been there early. Well, Bradford is writing at the end of his life to his wife's sister, who's back in England, in Somersetshire, and inviting her to come and live with them in Plymouth. She had been the youngest daughter. She'd lived with the mother, who went on to live to be 100, died, and then this poor woman is on her own. Bradford invites her across to live with him and his wife, but he explains the conditions are not that good here. You need to know what you would be letting yourself in for. So even then, towards the end of Bradford's life, it was no picnic being in Plymouth. So why come there and not say Virginia, where it's that further advanced? Also, what are you doing? Why are you there? And why are you there if you're young? So if he did come young, who came with him?
Mm.
As for where he came from, do you know there are Harlows in Kent? There are some from around Sandwich. Now, Sandwich had great connections with the New World. It was also a hotbed of separatists. I don't think that, you know, that's not a bad place to start. To look there, look for other nonconformists, because he must have been a forward Puritan or a nonconformist, or why go?
Mm.
Why not stay and make your way in England? So I want to know who he was with, how he got there. Was he a servant to somebody? Was he a gentleman? What's he doing there? Who did he come? And that will give you an idea of where he came from. So
Right.
yeah, I'd love to look into that, and I may be tempted to look into that.
Well, you have so much already on your plate. But that's very interesting, because I love that approach. You know, you have to think about the person and what makes sense for them in their context. What, you know, when would you expect to see them in colonial records? And then maybe work back from there. If we can eliminate, this may not be the right person we're looking for because it doesn't make sense. But then also, like you said, to sort of narrow your focus on where you might look for a record of a person based on some of those connections that might have existed. Because of course, William Harlow's first wife was the granddaughter of Richard Warren. So, you know, we just have these interesting connections with the first generation born in Plymouth, and the second generation, and those who came later on other ships. But you know, you do have this interesting insight perhaps into how they might have been on a similar page in terms of their faith or their reasons for being in Plymouth Colony. So I thank you for sharing that. And I'm sure that sort of applies to any kind of genealogy that you're doing, right? Don't, like you said earlier, don't assume that everyone has looked at all the documents. And one of the folks who've joined us today was saying, you know, well, sometimes documents just weren't available maybe 100 years ago when someone was doing this research and they didn't have access to the documents we might have access to today, or they might have not. Yeah.
Sometimes it's a case of not looking at the document. You may read it but you're not looking at it.
Mm.
I will read a will 2, 3 times, 4 times, put it away, come back to it. And in my latest research, the will of James Chiltern's father has been published many times. His inventory that went with the will has been published many times. And I've gone through that inventory and the will and have been able to piece together probably 90–95% probability of where that family actually lived by looking at those documents.
Wow.
And that is something that Caleb is actually talking about tonight somewhere else in America, about the fact that being able to pinpoint. We think we can show you a map and say that was James Chiltern's house.
Wow.
It's a case of looking at the documents and really thinking, and sometimes thinking outside of the box. I'm good at that.
Yes, good. Well, congratulations to you and Caleb Johnson, who's your co-researcher, and that's really exciting to uncover that location and another site for pilgrim tourists, right? We can. So we are at 3 o'clock, and I don't want to, I know some folks have already had to drop off the meeting because they had other meetings or other activities to go to. I'm just checking, again, we do have specific questions about specific family lines, and I would say that we will direct them to everyone to your books, which are available on AmericanAncestors.org. And so that is the American Ancestors is the website of the New England Historical Genealogical Society. And in their shop, their bookstore, they have, I think, all of your books, Sue.
Well, they certainly have 7 of them.
Okay.
They certainly have 7 online at the moment. So
I
should be something to please everyone.
Yes, I would refer everyone to those publications so that you can actually see or read if there's anything on the particular family line that you're interested in. And then, of course, if you have a question about lines that descend from the Pilgrims, I would refer you to the General Society of Mayflower Descendants, and they are in the process of revising and updating their silver books, which track the genealogies, the generations following the Mayflower following the families of the Mayflower passengers. So those are great resources. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with them, of course. So one last question just about location of sources. So a question about 17th century documents related to the Pilgrims. Are there any at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., or are most of the records you're looking at in the UK?
The records that I look at are UK records.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for these folk before they went to Leyden. That's how I can pin them down. So I concentrate on UK. And if you want to know which archive they're in, they could be in any archive across England waiting to be found, because they're not always kept in an archive in the specific area that a pilgrim may have lived. So that just makes it even more challenging. As for individual questions, I have a website, which is www.mayflowermaid, M-A-I-D, mayflowermaid.com. There's a contact form on that website. Contact me and I'm happy to answer your questions. I love hearing from interested parties, shall we say.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. That's a kind offer, Sue, very kind. And I hope all of those of you who had a question about a specific Mayflower passenger or anything else that wasn't answered, please do send that to to Sue, and that way she can correspond with you directly, and you'll find out more about her research. That's mayflowermaid.com, and that's also a wonderful place to learn about announcements of forthcoming books. And I think you list all your current publications, and then anything new that will be published, I'm sure will be linked there. And some of your research has also been published in the Journal of the Mayflower Society and other publications as well. So you can get the full books, but then there are articles. Are there any articles that are forthcoming, Sue, that you and Caleb have?
There's one coming out. It may already be out. It's the winter edition of the Register. That's the New England Historic Genealogical Society Register, and that one is about Gregory Priest.
Oh.
We published more about William White this year, about his occupation and being excommunicated from church in Wisbech. So we're trying to keep up with research. Caleb and I are continually working together, and yes, keep an eye out. If something is coming up, I will put it on my website, or follow me on Facebook. I have a Facebook page, and I keep people up with research, and people can talk to me there as well.
Wow, wonderful. This is so exciting. So there we have it. I think since we're past 3 o'clock now, I am going to bring our conversation to an end. But thank you, Sue, so much for joining us today, for taking your evening to be with us. And
it's been a privilege. It's been a real privilege to come share some time with you. And thank you so much for asking me.
Well, we are delighted that it was actually, again, Belinda Brewster, our board member, who recommended inviting you, because she's so enjoyed getting to know you and hearing other presentations. So perhaps we will be able to have you come back in person. One of the nice things about the virtual format is that we can do this fairly easily across the Atlantic, but we would much prefer having you back in Plymouth in person. So we're wishing you good health, and hopefully for all of us future ability to see each other in person and to travel too. So
thank you. Keep safe, everyone, and I do hope that I can make it there one day to see you all in person.
We
Thank
would
you.
love that. Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. And before we leave, I just wanted to, I was thinking about, often at the Antiquarian Society, we say, well, we are Plymouth Historical Society that focuses on Plymouth history after the Pilgrims. And I was wondering if anyone was going to say, well, Anne, why are we thinking about, why are we talking about the origins, the European English origins of these Pilgrim Mayflower passengers? And I just was reminded as we were preparing for this program that so much of what the early antiquarian members did, the founders of the Antiquarian Society, was actually to try to learn more about women's everyday life. That, they saw this gap. They saw that organizations like the Pilgrim Society, they had all these documents, and they were focused on, some of the written records that were available, and they were focused on the Pilgrim story. And but there was so much that wasn't written about women's lives that would be lost unless you saved things, preserved things like the houses that we have, the houses that were where they lived and they worked and they raised their children, and things like clothing and textiles, samplers, needlework. Those are the sorts of documents that we have for women. And then they even went further and, wanted to learn how women cooked on an open hearth. How did they make their clothes, from spinning and weaving your wool and dyeing and candle dipping and all of that. So I hope that if they were still with us today, I know that they would be fascinated by your research. And I think they would be very happy to know that, we are still trying to learn about women through, women in the past through research like you're doing, as well as just what we do in our historic houses. And we try to do is present that part of history as well. So thank you everyone so much for joining us today. And we will, if you ask to be added to our email list, we will add you, and that way you can stay in touch with us and get updates on upcoming programs. But if and regardless, you will be receiving a follow-up email from me, and I'll share some of the links that we've talked about to Sue's website and to the shop where you can buy her books, and that way we'll all be connected. So thank you everyone so much, and have a wonderful rest of the afternoon, or have a wonderful night, Sue, to you in England.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.